Hello again, Reg audience. Now, for our British audience, we have had some weather this week, and there's been a couple of centimetres of snow for everyone else. So, of course, that means that the entire UK has ground to a halt. So a lot of our Reg audience will be at home today watching our Regcast from the sofa. And so that means that we're competing with daytime television. So that's things like stories about people getting stopped at customs because they're bringing a wombat to a wedding or something like that, or some repeat of a teen comedy. So we better give you some proper educational entertainment today. And so that's why we're talking about the data centre that takes care of itself. This is something that's going to be far more useful for you than anything about wombats. Now, this is what we're on today. It's how to build and maintain and manage a data centre, and for a better lifetime management. So that's what we're dealing with today. It's a big subject. We're going to try and make some good practical sense for you, and also there's quite a lot of information about what you think about that, what you think is possible. Now, that means that we want to hear more about what you think is possible as well. So remember the little buttons above us. Make sure that you ask the questions that are on your mind, and I'll try and get them in because the guys in the studio today know about the practical details of lifetime management for your servers. And also you can get the slides, so you can have a look at the slides. So take those away with you. Look at them, peruse them at your leisure. Also, take them into work when you come back, so that when you're working from home, you can prove to your bosses that you were indeed working from home. Who's on our Regcast today? Well, our guest in the studio. It's his first time in the studio. We hope it's not his last. From HP, Peter Mansell. Peter, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Tim.
It's larger than it seems. When
Absolutely,
it's in the window, isn't it? It's quite, and it's lovely and warm, which is perhaps the most important.
Indeed, and I like the TV comparisons. I was a bit worried you're going to compare us to Loose Women for one moment, but
well, let's see what happens.
We'll avoid that.
Let's just see what happens. Peter, what do you do at HP?
So I work as a sales manager in the enterprise group at HP. I really look after primarily two things. One is our cloud system proposition, and two is our industry standard server propositions, so around all of our high performance computing and some of the solutions that we work on in that space.
Oh, okay. Why do they give you two jobs?
That's the way it works. That's the
job
recession, isn't it, really? Yeah, more responsibility.
There's more responsibility.
Absolutely.
It's saving their money. And also, thank you, Peter, joining us also. It's Dr. Stats himself, the Dark Lord. Welcome back, Tony Locke.
Thank you very much, Tim. I've tried to go for the teenager image, so I had my hair tinted grey just to give that teenage look.
Yes, you are naturally zany. You don't have to try, Tony. Yeah, you're wacky and well.
Yep.
Let's just leave it. I don't want to build you up too much. And you'll find out in the next hour. Oh, it'll be terrific. And also, of course, me feeding your questions to the guys and moving them on. So let's get straight on with this. Tony, the point of this is that we're not doing very well with managing the life cycle of the data centre, are we?
I would argue that we're actually doing a pretty good job, but things could be better. Mm-hmm. So it depends whether you've got the glass half full or half empty.
I'm a half empty kind of guy.
We have noticed.
Yeah.
I'm not usually seen as being the half full type, but what we have noticed over the last few years is there's been a lot of people reporting that IT is doing a really bad job supporting the business, which frankly isn't the case. As you can see, there's lots of green on the charts here. People do think that they're doing a reasonable job in most areas, but they also agree that there are plenty of places where things could be better, especially around delivering new services more quickly, so getting them out to the users faster, automating a lot of the processes that we do, because there's a lot that IT guys have to do as systems become more complicated. There's a recognition that there are things that could be improved, and trying to make things better, not just for IT, but obviously for the business themselves. Raising service levels where appropriate, making sure that we're monitoring things well, changing things quickly as business requirements move on.
And the complexity of the job, is that getting worse? I mean, like, Peter, for example, he's got to do two jobs. I mean, here we've got sort of like 5 tasks. there are many, many things that need to be done. Is there a sense that the data centre is getting a little bit out of control?
I'm not sure that it's getting out of control, but what has always been the case in data centres, we've had lots of discrete islands, lots of separated systems, and the glue that holds them all together are the people out there watching us now. It's the IT pros. They're out there, they're trying to do more and more, keeping things going under ever greater pressure, ever greater scrutiny as well as their business users saying, hey, look, can we get this cheaper somewhere else? We've heard this cloud stuff can do everything wonderfully. Why aren't we using it? So there's more and more pressure on IT. The IT guys are still trying to keep everything running. They're trying to respond more quickly, but a lot of the fragmentation that's in there might be holding them back and causing some of the red bits on the right-hand side of the chart here.
And I think just to add to that, we see lots of pressure in terms of business expectations. The business wants the IT team to deliver more, wants to deliver it faster, quicker, more efficient. That's just the pressure of the market and the economics. And you also see technology is so much more effective today. Servers are 3 times faster than they were 2 years ago, improvements in storage. So the technology's there. It's just sometimes the process and the functionality behind it.
And that expectation thing is really important because they're now comfortable using IT all the time at home as well. And so they think, well, we can just go to the cloud and pull down something. But that's not the same as a business service. Business has different needs to consumers, and that's something that's often lost in the comparisons between external and internal systems. But that expectation remains just as high. We always want to get the best.
Is there some of this, some of the problem in this, in the attitude that's being brought to this, the criticism of the IT department, because of the marketing of external cloud services, as in, I think we take the pain away?
Yeah, I think absolutely that is part of it. There are things that you can push out to the cloud, there are other things that you don't want to, or that you can't legally. So that pressure is there, but the people actually making the comparisons or doing the marketing don't always realise that, there are, to get back to the stable point of view, there are different horses for different courses. There are some things you can do, other things that you don't want to do, and still a third set of things that legally you cannot do.
Right, yes.
I think that that's the criticality of this new world and the emergence of cloud. Is really the IT team have got to be the central decision maker in deciding where those resources go. They're the people that know the legalities, as Tony said, and all the other challenges. So they've got to be that control point.
But quite often the IT guys don't know the legal point of view because how many people in the population as a whole, never mind in IT, are specialists in law? Yeah, very, very few. How many people want to be specialists in law? Even fewer. And so it's really difficult, but as long as people keep pulling things out of the cloud or pushing things out to the cloud that maybe they shouldn't, someone's going to take responsibility for that. And at the moment, people look to IT because it's an IT thing. But if IT doesn't always know what's going on, how can you stop people doing what they shouldn't do?
Well, you're covering some of the governance part of this slide here, in the sort of the fragmentation and the disjoints, and the slight mess that we have here. Go through these 3 points, Tony. Tell me why you picked these 3 out.
Well, these are again things that together we've come up with. We know. Register audience have told us that they've got lots of systems that have basically been acquired over time. People don't build a data center from scratch, unless they are one of the mega data center hosters that need to expand capabilities all the time. Most people have to work with what they've got, and they're built, section by section by section. Maybe even we buy some servers, we buy some storage, we buy some networking. Quite often it's, we've got an application to support, so we need to buy a piece of infrastructure to support it. People don't build data centers as a whole, so we've got lots of fragmented systems. Traditionally, teams inside large data centers have grown up around their speciality. What areas do they know? But just as with Peter, we're looking to get more and more integration with people capable of doing more than one job. So we're beginning to see some requirements for people to move forward there and be able to manage other parts of the infrastructure. I might be a storage specialist or a server specialist, but maybe there are some simple things that we can do with better management tools to help me just expand that so that the team as a whole can become more effective. But underneath that, we need to have basically an infrastructure that's more malleable, that's better glued together in the first place. And underlying everything, there's the funding and governance. How can we actually pay for shared resources? The Register audience have told us, over several surveys over many years, that the way things are funded is still pretty much built on the traditional model, which is, by essentially a silo. Building pools, how do we fund that? How do we get into cross-charging? Doing some chargeback reporting? Don't know. how do we governance this? What are the requirements on what we can legally do? What are the business needs that we need to meet?
So there's a sort of caveat in what we're going to cover today, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today are the sort of services in place that you can put in place to enable better monitoring, better reporting, these sorts of things. But unless underneath there is that flexibility to be able to put together a team that sees the whole picture across the data center, that gets those people working together rather than just in silos, for example, then you're putting in the sorts of monitoring that then can't be put back into the business and used to improve the quality of the data center.
Well, I think to expand on some of Tony's comments, that the challenge we often see is that a lot of customers build stuff in a project-by-project manage. So it's a a specific application or task in the business has its own set of infrastructure, has its own set of networking, storage and servers behind it.
You're saying that's a bad thing?
It can be a bad thing, depends how it's managed. Really you want to move to a services and flexible model, as we'll be talking about later. But I think where I see that the big challenge for a client is they're often constrained by the look and feel of their data centre, the power that they can deliver to the racks, the number of network ports that they've got available, and they end up kind of squashing a bit of infrastructure to fit the project rather than designing the best possible solution. And that's just the evolution of data centres. That's the challenge behind it.
The other thing with that project funding is that you usually have to work on the worst case scenario. It's really hard to acquire extra budget after you've built something, so you tend to put in more capacity than you need. It might also need to be disaster tolerant, so that we can have multiple systems running simultaneously, which means almost by definition that we've got more capacity than we're actually using. So again, in terms of cost effectiveness today and the way some of the financial metrics go, might not be the best way to do it, whereas the shared pools of resources are clearly offer better economics, but politically, can we still make that work internally? We know again from the register audience that time after time, the budget holders say, no, we've paid for that, we don't want to share it with another department.
And I think I'd just add on the kind of funding and governance piece, there's two different ways to look at it. Either you can change into a service provider internally and start billing the different departments, different business groups, or you can just use a cloud model, a funding model to drive the right behaviour. So, a specific department says, I need X infrastructure. Well, actually, you can have this infrastructure at a lower cost. So as an IT team, you begin to, draw back that control and get control of that budgetary purpose. So it doesn't always have to be a charging model. It can just be used to drive behaviour and set up the right systems.
But that's definitely something that, whilst we're looking at this, sits in the background, something that has to be thought about in parallel.
Well, it can't. You can't do it in a project isolation. It will simply never work. You have to do it as an overall strategy as part of the business.
Okay, no. Now, there is. You have brought some statistics here, Peter, about the problem of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was some work that we did back in our research and development activity that we did for our latest generation of servers. And we looked at a couple of things. Where do customers see the challenges in their environment? And there's three key points really. First is around manual operations. So that's the cost of physical people inside the data centre. That's the cost of delivering firmware updates, installing equipment. And then we looked around the challenges around facility optimisation. So that's just something simple, like if I'm running a group of servers, could I change the power that those servers draw over a period of time? Perhaps when the application's not being run as hard, could I drop down that power and reuse that elsewhere in the data centre? That's a real struggle for a lot of our clients. They don't have that scope, that capability to do it, because again, data centres have been designed 20 years ago. They can't necessarily move the resources around. So that was one of our focus areas. And then probably the most important one is how do we remove this cost of unplanned downtime? As a vendor, whether we want to, we can't really get away from the fact that there is going to be need for downtime in a customer environment. There's always changes, there's always updates, there's always upgrades. But how can we plan that in a systematic, way to make it more efficient? And I think one of the bits of information that's on there that we gathered from this research work that we did, so it was nearly 100,000 customers that we worked with to understand problems inside an infrastructure environment. We found that over 50% of our support calls that were logged based on motherboard failures of servers were down to bent pins on CPUs. So something as simple as that has caused all of those outages. Now, clearly there's other challenges. So we looked at what can we do to solve that, and we went away and we designed a simple smart socket system that means the pins can't be bent. You know, I would hazard a guess even you could install it.
I could still have a
give it a
pretty good go.
I've done one, and if I can do it, then there's hope for all of us, I think. So yeah.
Actually, we could send you round to everyone. You know, if you've got a problem with your pins, then
that could be my third.
Yeah,
that could be my third job then, I guess, couldn't it?
Well, you know, what do you do with your spare time?
Indeed.
So, I mean, are you actually saying here that with the problem of people, the manual problems here? Is it that the staff aren't very good, or is it that... Yeah, are you shaking your head?
I'm shaking my head there. I was an IT guy.
Yeah, I know you're protective.
The staff are good, but when you've got so much to do, people making changes have, for the last 25 years, been the biggest cause of service interruption. You know, whether it's a software change or whether it's, you know, something like a bent pin when you're putting in hardware. It's people making changes that cause most things to go wrong. Mm-hmm. Always has been, almost certainly always will be. And as you're under more and more pressure to do things more quickly, and you've got more complex systems to look after, with you know, still those silos in place, it's almost inevitable that you're going to get problems. Mm-hmm. So it's not that the IT guys are not good.
Uh-huh. So we're talking about taking some of the lifecycle management out of the hands of people.
Yeah,
making fewer decisions, doing fewer things.
It's just trying to make tasks simpler. You know, something as simple as inserting a CPU should be done in an easy fashion and should be guided by the customer. You know, and there's lots of other things we do inside a server environment to drive that forward.
Yeah, Tony, you've been asking the Reg readers what they would like to happen.
Yep.
What they think is good, changes that they would like to see.
Yep. Just before Christmas, we asked the audience what, you know, in an ideal world, if you had no legacy to look after, what sort of things would you really like to come out? And this was originally a chart with lots of numbers on it, but you objected to that, so I tried to put them in boxes.
What I did is, if you download the deck, it's easy. Tony always puts lots of tiny little text on his things, and I'm always telling him off about it because I say you can't see it when it's on the screen. If you download the deck, then you'll find the original chart with the little numbers on it is the last slide on the deck. So we're not going to show that today. We're protecting you from it, for your benefit. So don't put it in boxes here instead. But there is a quantitative version as well as the qualitative version we've got here.
So basically, just trying to interpret what those numbers mean. We've been told that getting consistent joined-up systems that work together well is really top of the wish list. These are all in different colours, but frankly, the difference is in the vision requirements. You know, what would they really like to see? What would really benefit them?
So the green stuff is what they really, really want to see.
Yeah, but the differences between all of these bars weren't that big to begin with. But you know, this is really just people want things that work together well, that allow them to automate things. The ability to do things across, you know, server, storage, and networking using just one familiar piece of software to manage everything. Really ideal. The ability to provision systems very quickly. The ability to change things, you know, with as fewer manual intervention as possible are really top of the lists there. And at the bottom here, and again, there wasn't much, but in terms of vision terms, if we do have stuff that we could move inside and outside of the business as resources change, or maybe as, you know, we run out of capacity and we need to just push something out for a time, if we could do that automatically and monitor everything well, then that'd really be good. And it's interesting that monitoring still crops up as a desire for things to be great, because we've been monitoring forever, but maybe not always monitoring as well as we could do, and measuring everything we might need to. And that's something that's beginning to change as well, as Peter's going to cover in the not too distant future.
So that consistency and being joined up in what you do but that's the fundamental thing that people desire.
And we've had that come back in survey after survey with the register audience. We've asked people, you know, do you want more capabilities inside your management tools, or do you want management tools that work better together? And the work better together has come out time after time as being, you know, of a higher desirability than actually having even more functionality, because I don't know what the audience think, but you know, most of the people out there probably use barely 10%, if that, of their management capabilities that are built in there. because they've got so many things that they could do, which again gets back to that automation. If the system actually knew what to change to make things better automatically, so I didn't have to fiddle with 97 different variables, then great. And we've seen an acceptance of that automation growing over the last 5 years.
Really?
When we asked the audience 3 or 4 years ago, are you ready for automation? It's a nice idea, but I probably still want to say yes before any changes are made. But now for some of the routine things that we're talking about, I'm happy. I accept now that the technology has matured to a stage where it can do what it says on the tin. We're ready for that.
I see, your vision here. This is your vision, Tony.
Not necessarily just my vision, but also, again, taking the feedback from the register audience. They've told us that, we're looking to deliver IT services more in line with business services, so turning into that sort of service provider, where if the business needs something, we can work out the best way to deliver it, whether it's internally, externally, whatever, but we can actually keep the customers happy there. Take a much broader view, and I don't like the word holistic, but it got onto the slide somehow. But take a broader view.
Put it there, I think.
I actually think that I probably, cut and pasted it in from another chart that we had. It looks more like one of Dale's words than one of my words.
You're all in the same business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But actually, looking at things as a whole rather than in those silos, that's certainly an ideal, but how can we actually make that change, with the governance and the funding issues?
And I think to add to that, I would say you want to get to this point where you look at things at a service level. I'm delivering a piece of infrastructure to support an application. I want to deploy that in an automated fashion, but I also want to understand through the life cycle of that service, am I using all of the resources that are built behind this?
And also,
can I release some of that back? Is there an option there for me?
And also, what is the service level? Am I monitoring the service level in the best way? Lots of service level agreements today have been set up along the lines of, well, what can we actually measure? And that might be uptime, which is great, but if the system's running so slowly that the users are actually, walking away and making a cup of coffee while they're waiting for a transaction to complete, might not be the most appropriate service level to be monitoring. So getting service levels that we're monitoring that meet the business users' requirements, but also that we can vary, because the business users' requirements of that service level might change over time. There'll be times in the year when you want things to run really quickly, other times where maybe you don't need it to. And as the next box here says, having resources that we can shift around as demands change, they tie together.
And guys, what you're doing, you're setting up quite a long list of things that need to be sorted out here. I can see I can see how good this vision is. But what we really need to do is to look at this data center vision and all the things that we say are desirable, and to be able to say what are we realistically going to achieve. So I guess, we better launch into that to make sure we've got enough time to get through it.
Absolutely.
You've got a big job on your hands.
Thank you, Tim.
Yes. So let me get into this one. In the integrated lifecycle automation idea, this is your vision of how we begin to sort this one out, Peter.
Yeah, I think this is probably, to get any of this service level stuff and this on-demand and flexible computers we talk about, to get that right, you need to have the underlying processes and systems and reporting correct, and I think that's what we try to focus on here. So within the HP brand, we have this kind of focus around what we call completeness of thought. So when you look at a piece of infrastructure or a server, what we're talking about is the ability to deploy, operate, and maintain through its life cycle. We can if we just focus on the deployment, yes, we get a system up and running in a short space of time, but as we all know, the cost of a piece of infrastructure has occurred more in the years after purchase rather than day one. So that's our whole focus, is how do we do those three things really well. And the first piece we look at is how can we intelligently provision some of our systems.
I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
Just a quick question that's just come in. If you're having trouble downloading the deck, refresh your browser, and then the download thing will be there, and then you can download it. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So we focus on intelligent provisioning. How can we get the system up and running quicker? So that's simple things like boot up the server, we're straight into video and we're straight into the deployment method. We integrate the software and therefore giving us a faster delivery cycle. And that process is designed to be, almost a drag and drop. We can pull down an operating system image and continue from there. So that's the day one, if you like. The first day of the server, how do we look after it and how do we maintain it?
Yeah.
The second thing we do is we look at how do we manage that product for its life cycle? So there's this horrible thing inside data centers called firmware. which is how do we get all these different bits of technology to talk together? And that is a common problem, okay? That is not going to go away. As we introduce more components and more technology, faster components and faster technology, that firmware situation becomes even more of a tangled mess. So any vendor that suggests that's not an issue is probably moving over the problem. So we focus on, we know it's an issue, we know it's a challenge. How can we make that situation a bit simpler for the customer to maintain? So that's about simple things like staging some of the updates. So, understanding if I do this update on these machines, what impact will it have? I don't always have to be at the latest revision. What's the actual benefit of that happening? And we focus on a lot of that through our Smart Update Manager tool. So it makes recommendations to the IT administrator, for example. This firmware revision will give you X. Is that critical to what you're trying to do in the business? So it gives them that analytics, that tool. And then the last thing we do, if we look at that kind of operate and maintain philosophy, we look at how can we deliver some intelligence behind the system. So how can we monitor the server estate and understand, what temperature it's running at, how much power I'm utilising, can I remove that and push that resource elsewhere? And that's part of the functionality that we've got in the software that keeps the analytics going, so that the ultimate objective is the customer understands exactly what he's monitoring and measuring. You've
got 1,600 parameters.
Yes, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
That's quite a big dashboard.
Absolutely.
Not a particularly useful dashboard, I would vouch.
So it's very easy to capture data, isn't it? We can put components inside servers and capture data.
Evidently.
The part that's hard is creating meaning out of that.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't expect a customer to sit there and watch those parameters come in, but what we can do is produce reporting on the back of it to say, my group of servers in this particular rack, tell me about their power utilisation. Do I need to provide extra cooling to that rack inside the data centre because I've got them running at a higher temperature? That's when you start to use it a lot more intelligently, when you've got that reporting functionality behind it.
And Tony, is it the case that at the moment there's not enough being monitored, or that just we're monitoring things but we don't really know what that means?
A combination of the two. There are certainly times when something goes wrong and you find out that you're not monitoring the bit that's gone wrong. Or that there might be a build-up of things over time that if they had been proactively monitored, you might have seen that maybe a drive was about to fail, and so you could spin it down and get the data off. All the sorts of stuff that the guys out there know to do. But unless you've got that information up front in a way that you can digest, as you said, that's something that it's a combination of the two. We need to monitor more, but we need the intelligence to come back out of it so that we can actually act on it rather than sit there in front of, as you say, screens that you're never going to see what's going on. You can't see the wood for the trees, to take the phrase. But equally, it's the case of taking away a lot of these change management elements that cause problems in the first place. It takes a lot of effort and time to do change management, so anything that can reduce the amount of work you need to do there to sanity check things before you run them out. Firmware in particular, managing firmware is such a pain that lots of people try to put it off for as long as they possibly can, quite often until the vendors tell them, hey guys, look, if you don't get off this, we're going to take away support. So anything that can smooth that out, make things better, is something that will be accepted quite happily. And it goes into this, start off where you can to make some of these visions get closer.
I mean, you're conservative when it comes to introducing just updates willy-nilly, aren't you?
Yep.
So you can see the temptation to say, okay, when we've got something, it all hangs together. It's not breaking down. Let's just lock that down for a little while and not do anything until it's absolutely necessary.
Certainly. But again, if there are some of the benefits that come from the changes that have been put into the firmware to make the system more reliable, more effective, whatever, take away some risk that's been identified, then these are things that, if the update process has been automated so that there are fewer things you need to check on your change management process, it's easier to do.
I think just to add on that, if we go back to the firmware discussion, argument on that, really, there's two things to firmware. There's one is how you deploy it, i.e. have you got a piece of software that can automate the deployment so you're not going around clicking individual boxes to deploy. And the second thing is how frequently do you change it? And when we've got all these components that are interlinked inside a piece of infrastructure, as a vendor we build a support pack that will update firmware of multiple components rather than individual ones at the same time. Because typically you'll get conflict where you update one and don't update the other. So if we can produce that, I guess we get the tool that's able to deliver it and set it up in a much more meaningful and quicker manner, but we also make sure the release schedule is much better organised.
And
we focus on that a lot.
The guys out there trying to get a change window to actually do some of these things, the end users always want those change windows to be as short as possible. And so if you are having to manually update multiple components, then the chances of you accidentally missing one, so that one's been updated, one hasn't, and you get the system failure that you only find out about when you try to restart the system, and then working out which one didn't I do. It's not easy, so anything that takes away some of that stress and pain will be welcomed by everybody, the business and the IT guys.
You're comfortable with that? The idea to solve the decreasing complexity of this is basically step back, automate it as much as you can.
Automate as much as you can,
Yeah. Okay. Let's have a look. Now we're looking at that, at the operations and management side.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like there's a decent number of reg readers that don't think that these changes are going to come along pretty soon. Looks like we're in pretty early with this Regcast.
Well, it's a combination. You can see there's a lot of, dark blue on the left-hand side where people think it's happened already. And those tend to be obviously the early adopters. Quite a few of whom are working for service providers where there's clearly, extreme drives to do this economically. But as you look across the chart, there's the red bars on the right-hand side and the grey bars, the dark grey bars on the right that say it's never going to happen or it's going to be more than 10 years away. But, the majority of people across all of these capabilities think that, they're going to happen sometime in the next, 3, 5, certainly by 10 years' time. A lot more of this automation is going to be there. We're actually ready for it as well to actually use the automation. Where we trust that the automation will work, we're happy to take that. If we'd have asked the audience 5 years ago, as I said, people would have probably wanted to, I've been sold automation before and it hasn't really worked, so I still want to sanity check everything. But now, increasing levels of automation is being accepted by the register audience. So we can see that certainly, even within my lifetime, a lot of these capabilities will be there. Of course, by then our expectations of nirvana would have changed and we'll be looking for more stuff.
But I mean, as an old man, you can have some satisfaction
look back
in the future to say that. Interestingly, people are most sceptical here about the moving workloads backwards and forwards between public and private cloud.
Yeah,
at the moment.
They're sceptical on that for a number of different reasons. They're happy for some things to move out and some things that they absolutely don't want to move out. But just the idea that they can shift things easily, that there's obviously a number of technological barriers in there to do with, how good's my network connection to begin with? If we're moving lots of data around, then that's clearly an issue. But there's also the fact that, I can monitor things internally on my system. How can I monitor them externally on my service providers? Sometimes there's incompatibilities there. So that there's more skepticism there that will happen more quickly. Personally, I think that things will change over time because the service providers become more aware of what their customers are actually looking for in terms of monitoring and management and the ability to actually influence the way they run things back to them. And as they get more granular control so that they don't have to offer just a blanket one-size-fits-all service.
I think on the private public cloud piece, that's going to be a constant debate for the next 12 to 18 months. And the way I see it is that, really... a business has got to determine where does that workload best sit. Is it a short-term workload that I'm running for 2 to 3 months just to support a marketing campaign? Okay, well, actually the best place for that is a public cloud because I don't want to go out and buy the infrastructure to support that. But if it's a business-critical application with intellectual property, there's no way you'd want that sitting out in a public cloud domain. So it's kind of that balance that's got to be.
And this chart absolutely doesn't say that public cloud isn't going to happen. What it's saying is that we will do things sensibly and put things where we want to.
Things in order.
But the idea that we can do it easily and move things around between them as we want to, that's the bit here that there's more scepticism about.
I think customers to get that balance right will be the ones that deliver the biggest saving.
Yes, but Peter, even you're saying that many of the tools to be able to do this, we've covered some now and we're going to cover some more in a minute, that many of the tools to be able to do this are available now. If you look at the other bars. So is it disappointing to you to see that in most cases then a majority of people are saying, well, it's within 5 years, but they're not more ambitious?
Yep. Well, that's one of the challenges of change, isn't it, really? People are often reticent to change. They're used to managing their systems in the way that they've done. And ultimately what we're talking about here with cloud is really changing the way that they deliver that. So there's a constant barrier to that. But yeah, I guess it.
But even with lots of, even with your life cycle management tools that we've got here, that some of these things, some of the other bars that you see here, there is still only a minority of people who are thinking of moving to Tony's big vision. Mm-hmm. of management and operations within 3-5 years. You think this can be done sooner?
Well, I think the technology is already there to do it. The technology is probably the easier part, i.e., it's supported and certified by vendors and public cloud operators. The hard bit is the business process behind it. It's also and the culture change.
It's also the funding as well, to get back to that topic. A lot of people would have bought, a lot of server infrastructure in the last few years that, their auditors say this has got a lifetime. So we're only writing it off, year by year. And in the past, whereas you may have had mainstream servers that were expected to last 2-3 years, now the Reg audience told us a year ago that they're expecting them to last 4 or 5 years, which again plays into the sort of timeframes we're looking at here. The number of organisations that can change radically quickly are very, very small. Most people change progressively, comfortably, step by step over time. You get very few revolutions in any area of life, never mind in IT, and I think where the business relies on everything, so you can't take too many risks in one go.
And I think that's what we've seen. We see customers start off with a couple of projects where they feel this automation would add benefit, and then it progresses out from there. And certainly the technology doesn't require a change in infrastructure. There's no reason why some of these solutions can't be implemented on what the customer's already got.
Right, they just have to get the budget to buy it.
But there's obviously an implementation cost and there's a business process cost behind it. But in terms of the infrastructure, that doesn't have to radically change from what they're doing now.
And business process is an interesting thing. We saw earlier that people wanted, better integrated tools, but also, integrated teams. And getting that political integration, even inside IT, is not always easy to change. Changing people and the way things have always been done takes time. And again, you've got to be comfortable that there's minimal risk in making that change.
Okay, let's have a look. If you can't get there on your own, then you're basically saying that using external services and support, that will help as well.
I think you've got to have a combination of both, haven't you, to ultimately deliver some source and some benefit for the customer. So, from our perspective, it's not just about being reactive to service and support. It's not about taking a customer call and then sending them away to do a number of logs and tests and diagnostics to figure out what's wrong.
Call us back when you've worked out what's wrong.
Yeah,
and we'll tell you you're right.
Or turn it off and on again, which is obviously the old adage in that space. So it's more about being proactive with what we do. So if there's an update pending or a change pending, we recommend to the customer that they make that change. But we discuss with them the impact that's ongoing in that space. Mm-hmm. And we focus on a couple of aspects here. One is that we have a great piece of functionality in our software called the Insight Online portal, which is designed to enable us to collect, so all those 1,600 parameters that you kindly pointed out was quite a lot earlier on.
It is quite a lot.
That's the portal that's able to collect the data behind that. So that a support engineer from either HP's business or one of our partners' business can go in and see, right, for the last six hours or 6 months or whatever it is, that server's been running extremely hot. What's the challenge behind that? Is that a workload issue? Is that a DIMM failure? Is that a fan failure? That's designed to do the analytics behind it. Mm-hmm. And the purpose there is just faster problem resolution. It also gives us as a vendor great data to go back and say, we've got a challenge or an issue here. How do we fix it? How do we resolve it?
So lots of people are getting the same problem. You send it back to your people.
Well, we've got a chance to understand what's causing the problem, haven't we? Rather than perhaps replacing components on a consistent basis. That's going to happen whatever we think about IT. And we work on a proactive basis. So some of this can be 24/7 monitoring. We can do something simple in the server management world, like replace a hard disk drive before it fails. If we notice it degrading, the same with a piece of memory, the same with a CPU. So you can actually have that component changed before it actually fails, and that's part of the automation process in terms of support. And then we work heavily with our partners on, them being able to deliver and work on this for a lot of our clients as well.
Mm-hmm. Tony, there's been a promise of this for quite some time.
There's been a promise of it, but one thing before we go on the whole concept of support particularly in terms of, internal systems where the business knows that they want support on it, and that expectation of customers, the expectation of users that they can go to the cloud and get things done.
Yeah.
The support offered by some cloud vendors, and cloud is a broad term as we know,
Yes.
varies enormously. And so again, it's horses for courses time. You've got to make sure that you've got the appropriate level of support for the appropriate service that you're pushing out there. And businesses want to be supported for their business critical information and the systems. Living without support is just not something that anybody would consider.
No.
And so that's something that, again, the people making these comparisons between internal and external have to realise. But at the moment, the marketing around cloud doesn't bring that into it at all. And we know, from our own experience and that of the Reg readers who have told us, that getting support from some suppliers is by no means easy, if not impossible. Whereas, for business, you've got to have it. You can't rely on community support. Do you want your business to be at risk of getting some bad advice, or not any advice because no one's had the problem before?
Well, I mean, that's fighting talk, because, I mean, a lot of businesses are looking more at community support.
I know, but are you willing to take the risk and put your business's profits, your business's potentially existence on the table to be supported by a community where you may not know everybody in it?
Well, yeah, it's not a question I can answer, but you can. So, yeah, tell me if you agree with Tony. Okay, so, and have the... close your ears, Peter, for a minute. But, have the vendors been asleep at the wheel a bit with this here?
Most of the traditional vendors have been very good at support, because it's something that, they've had to do over their lifetime, because, as it says, people want to pick up the phone and say, look, we've got a problem, how do we fix it? And most vendors are really good at helping with that, because they know that if they don't help, the biggest reason they're not going to get the next contract is if they mess up support. It's not how good their price is, because no matter how good the price is on the next contract, if you've messed up seriously enough on support, you're not going to get the deal. So the vendors have been good at that, partly through necessity, but also because it makes good business sense anyway. And that's the way IT has grown up. So the support side, I think that the traditional vendors really get it. Some of the newer cloud vendors, particularly the ones that have come more from the consumer base, where support is less of an issue, and you might be happy, to use community support for your own personal things that you're using on the web. But your business critical systems or your business important systems, different matter. But can we move forward to this nirvana? We've heard lots of things about this. Well, again, it's the step-by-step approach. People have been talking about things getting better over time, and they are better now than they were 20 years ago. They are better now probably than they were 5 years ago. And, the technology's improved. The number of times when you have system failures today compared to when I was first in IT back in the early 80s, it's a completely different ballgame. The number of change windows that people need to do routine maintenance. I used to be in probably one weekend a month, certainly one weekend every 2 months, doing upgrades of one sort or another, when people weren't using the system. Now people use the systems all the time. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, people would have thought it strange that they could use systems, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now it's accepted. So things have got better. They're continually moving forwards. But we are getting to a stage now where some of the changes that we're talking about are going to have, an even bigger impact than just the simple technology evolution that we've gone through in the last 5-10 years.
Let's stay with these improvements to reporting that we've got here, because I think this is pretty important, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
Fundamental that we are capturing the information that we need, but we're also capturing it in a way we can act on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work on a philosophy of using some of the technology that's been on our servers for many years. So we have a technology called Integrated Lights Out, which is our remote management functionality in the servers, and it's really designed to be your calling point into the machine, so you can understand what's going on with the server if you want directly. You can reboot the server, re-image the server, whatever's required. So that's kind of, at a simple first level, that's one of the things that you get with an HP environment. The second thing is we then move up to our on-premise solution. What do we do if we want to take actually a system view of things rather than an individual componentry view? And that's where we start to look at our insight control software. So how can we, do a check on what energy is being used inside that environment? Can I migrate it from an existing machine? All of those functionalities then become important. And then the final stage for us is how do we push that data, as we discussed previously online, so I can actually make some sense out of it, some use, deliver some benefit, really.
There's another major factor here, which is that integration with other management tools. To make things easier, not just using our technology, but if we need to flip into somebody else's, how seamlessly can we do that, or do we have to retype in everything?
Yeah.
That's something that has been getting better, and it's certainly some of the things that are part and parcel here too.
Well, it goes right back to the beginning when we were talking about the fragmentation being the problem. It's very important that you play nice with other management tools.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we have, within our Insight portfolio, we have full integration with products like VMware vCenter, which is a common data center management tool, and the same with System Center as well. So yeah, that management exists. They can continue to use those tools, but those products and those solutions will talk to the functionality that we're talking about here. So yeah, that interaction exists already. Absolutely.
The point you made about reporting being important, particularly in terms that people can understand, applies not just to the IT teams, but potentially IT using that reporting back to their business users so that they can understand, what quality of service has been delivered, how have we improved things for you, what could we potentially do differently, what would the impacts of those changes be, either in terms of, you get a better service, but it's going to either cost more, or we're going to need more resources to do it, or we could maybe drop it down a bit, but you probably wouldn't notice. That sort of thing is something that IT could get much better at, and politically it makes life much easier during the whole budgeting process if you're reporting in ways that the end users can actually understand, rather than the highly technical reports that I used to generate that even I didn't understand.
I sort of can't believe that they can. Yes, it's. That's been a long-term frustration for you for the last few years, that IT departments aren't doing a better job at
communicating
the service that they are providing. Peter, from your point of view, do you see your customers have an appetite for being able to tell the story of the service that they provide using this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the challenge is you can't really understand what level of service you're providing unless you can track that back and understand how it's being used. That's the fundamental thing. As an IT team, do you know that service is delivering what you need it to do? And more importantly, is there any excess capacity in there that I could release elsewhere to the business? That's when we drive the intelligence behind it, really.
Now, is all this a net cost, Tony, though? There's the problem. I'm seeing some sort of, there's lots of things here that seem, great. There doesn't seem to be a particular downside in knowing better how your business is working. But on the other hand, where can we make the money back on this?
Well, it's an interesting question, because a lot of the areas we're talking about, essentially the bulk of the cost, as Peter said, revolves around the lifetime costs. Yeah. And those lifetime costs, the energy component may be going up as electricity costs rise, but frankly, most of it's people costs. And so people costs are really hard to monitor. How much time is somebody spent doing something in relation to this business service? What we're doing is actually making the business service more reliable. We're giving the business what it wants more quickly. So there's the potential for the business to actually make more money, do whatever it is doing more effectively. But also, we can actually do more and more and more, so the business can expand its portfolio. And something that, again, the register readers have told us time after time is that, whilst the services they're supporting are growing and growing and growing, teams are not growing linearly with it. The IT support teams are not growing at the same rate. So a lot of the value here is in terms of, risk avoidance, service quality for the end users, having the IT staff just being plain more productive, because they are delivering more and more without the underlying wage bill going up proportionally. So there are savings in there. There's an economic case to be made, but unfortunately a lot of them revolve around soft costs, and most organisations are really good at tracking acquisition costs, and they're really bad at covering operational costs, which is why a lot of the TCO type tools and reports you get, or even some of the figures that Peter had in there earlier, a business being costed, being exposed to $10 million losses per hour through downtime. Some businesses will, some won't. But it's something that's really hard to put a pound sign, a euro sign, a dollar sign against, how well is your business running?
Let's bring this all together, because I've got a couple of questions, specifically some questions about more detail about the integration with other with other vendors? And also, does security have, is there a security side to this? Some people asking about data center security being something that they want to manage better.
Yeah, so I guess if I tackle the integration one first, that's that's pretty simple. It's on the slide as well.
It's on the
slide. Well timed.
On the slide, we only know what's on the slide.
Indeed. So I think from an integration point of view, it's dead simple. We recognise that there's other management tools in the data centre, and our job is to capture and report the information and tie into those when necessary. So, the simple thing with Insight Control is if you're accessing through vCenter, you still log in through that console, you access that console, but in the background the two pieces of software can talk together.
Okay.
So something simple like if we notice a challenge in a physical server, we can notify VMware to go and move the VMs onto another machine. That intelligence exists in the background already.
And that's done automatically.
Yep, it can be done automatically. That's in place now, and it just needs that integration work between the two completed. So, that functionality is there, and that exists now and today. And the other question was around security. So, security can be part of the mix here in terms of the software, because we can put some controls and some, processes in place with some of these tools and some of this software. And then it can also be treated from a separate entity, at a data center level, at a firewall level. Mm-hmm. So I would say some of the processes that we can put in place here will help drive more effective security measures because we're consistent in what we do and we can manage and monitor it.
Mm-hmm. Security integration is something, again, that cropped up in the surveys when we were asking people about, what's their nirvana, and getting security tools that work together better is even more of an issue than the traditional IT systems management tools. We've been looking for single sign-on, nirvanas ever since I was a boy, and we're still not there yet. We've been looking at actually making sure only the right people have got access to the right resources. Well, some of that comes down to, do you know what resources you've got in the first place, and do you know what people you've got in the first place? And again, the audience tell us that quite often their knowledge is maybe not up to date, and certainly anything but complete. So security integration is a really big problem, especially as the business pressures around security change as well. So you're probably going to be seeing more and more encryption going on to protect information. How do you do key management over long periods of time? How do you get that working with the access systems? How do you get everything automatically provisioned in line with processes? So that Uber sort of management framework, the orchestration that occurred in the vision statement earlier, that's something that's really important, not just for the traditional IT management tools, but for security. But security, again, is to a large degree much more, even more so than the stuff we've been talking about people and process, rather than technology alone. Without the people and process bit, you can have the greatest individual security tools in the world. They don't work unless you use them properly.
Yeah. Now let's have a look on this this slide that brings different aspects together. Sort of, Pete. I notice also. Sorry. I notice also we've got energy gets a space here. People really care about that.
Well, I guess it depends who's paying for it at the end of the day. Somebody in the business will care about it. And I think, what we focus on there is how can we be a bit clever about the energy we use. Systems will draw power based on the usage rate, and sometimes will draw more power than they need. So can we, if we track that power and that delivery, could we go back in 2 weeks' time and say, actually, those servers can be reduced, we can cap them down to 200 watts rather than 400 watts. That all breeds some intelligence inside the data centre. It reduces the cooling need, and it means actually I could go and use that power elsewhere, or I can return it back to the national grid and save myself some money. So, it's all about using the data to give you that intelligence and drive some cost savings for the business. And in my experience, I don't think enough clients do that at the moment. I think there's a case of they put a server in, they allocate the power to it, and then they manage it for its life cycle. They never really go back and check, actually, am I using as much power as I need? Can I drop it down? And they can drive some pretty simple savings through that.
Yeah.
I once worked for an energy management company, believe it or not, way back in the mists of time. But we know, again, from the register audience that energy monitoring in IT is not something that most businesses spend an awful lot of time doing today. There's clearly a growing pressure to save money on energy costs, but that applies across the business as a whole. And most of the data centres that are in operations today, the energy bill is still, in most instances, somebody else's problem. to use the phrase from Douglas Adams and The Hitchhiker's Guide. It's not something that the IT guys are charged with actually reducing. That's beginning to change, though. What we could also see, though, is the flip side, where more and more services are being centralised into the data centre. Things like desktop virtualisation spring to mind, which seems to raise the power demand on the data centre because you're running more in there, but actually you're drawing less out in the offices where people are not running PCs all the time, or over time they'll be running different clients that draw less electricity. So one of the things that could happen here with the power monitoring and reporting is beginning to talk to people more about, well, okay, we're spending more money here, but we're delivering more services again. Hey guys, look, you want this. We're actually saving elsewhere. It's down to that reporting side. If you don't monitor and report, then nothing happens. Energy monitoring and reporting is changing slowly, but it is definitely becoming a more visible item.
Once you get into this monitoring and reporting, a lot of the answers aren't quite as simple as the questions, are they?
It's actually getting to ask the questions in the first place, though.
Yeah. The question, another question, Peter, is are the hardware vendors working more closely with applications vendors and the OS vendors now?
Yeah, I certainly think so. I mean, the fact that we've got integration with things like vCenter and System Center would naturally suggest that. And yes, there's tie-ins that you can make to some of the application tools. I mean, our primary goal is to manage and monitor the hardware, but obviously we're very cognizant of the fact that there's the underlying application above that. So yeah, I think that already happens. Clearly, there's more that can be done there, but.
Yeah, and is that a focus? Because there's another question sort of popping up saying, how closely are you monitoring from the application point of view and knowing how the application stresses the hardware?
So we can do that. I mean, the solutions that we've been talking about today don't look at the application level. They're really looking at the infrastructure. But there's certainly offerings we have in that space that will look at application monitoring, and then all it does is dial into the hardware. The hardware monitoring tools in the background. So yes, that integration does exist.
Let's have a look. Just to finish off, then. So we have a look at the practical problems of sort of getting started with this, Tony.
Yep. You've heard me say this before. Where to get started?
I've heard you say it many times. I know what you're going to say.
It's basically about knowing what you have in the first place and which services you're delivering, who's using them, what the business requirements are wrapped around those services. If you've got that information, then you can begin to look at doing things differently. Until then, you're probably just trying to keep up. So getting that core information, which again the audience have told us, they've not always had the recognition inside the business that it's worth investing in those tools, is something, you can save money on it anyway, but you need that before you can really start changing anything. Change management without that information is a pain at the best of times. But with the increase in options for how to deliver services, whether through internal clouds, there might even be good reasons for having an internal siloed system, for particular business services, or external resources in different components. It's very much going to become a hybrid world. Whether you're changing things quickly or slowly, whether you're using internal, external resources, whether you're perhaps even managing some of your internal resources via a third party, dialing in and looking after some of those core components for you. It's going to be a mix and match. So know what you've got, know what you need in terms of service, and then look around for what's the best way to do that. It's something that IT's always done, but perhaps it's now being done much more consciously rather than almost at a subconscious level.
Peter, why shouldn't I just wait for my next big hardware refresh?
Well, I think you can do that, but I guess the challenge is you're going to do probably the same thing again. It would be disastrous
for your career.
Well, you're going to end up doing the same thing again, aren't you? If you don't change your strategy and you keep on buying in a piecemeal approach and a project approach, you're going to be sitting here in 2 years' time thinking about the same challenges. You need a strategic change to make a difference. And I think if I could just add on, on the diagram that's on the screen there, really. There's always going to be a mix of different sources of IT, okay? There's still going to be some applications that sit on traditional infrastructure. There's no point automating or putting them into a cloud because they run a batch processing job, and there would be no benefit from doing that. There's always going to be a mix where some applications will sit better in the private cloud and others in the public cloud. I guess the ultimate goal is to get an IT team that is able to judge where those resources best sit. and ultimately becomes a service broker inside the business. That's the driver, that's the goal for many of them.
And that ties in very neatly with those vision statements we saw earlier about having the ability to move things around where we need to move them, where we want to move them, when we want to move them, and having that single vision of what's going on, how can we change it, what's the impact of change.
So I mean, what matters is that we're always going to be at different parts of the life cycle for different parts of the business, different applications. So just saying that there'll never be a blank sheet of paper, just to try and work some pieces in.
Yeah, you've got to have that strategic view so that when you're buying the new pieces, they have the potential to be expanded later, to become part of a bigger something. You know, so you might start off, you're supporting one thing, but you're not building it in a way that it cannot grow to become part of a dynamic pool, if that's what you want. If it's a fixed workload that's going to be there forever, then fine, you can just leave it alone and it's constant. And you just hope that the business criteria don't change around it. But that's the way life is for nearly everybody. So it's a case of, having that vision so that you can, you might still be buying in chunks, but you're buying chunks that can be glued together more easily without those people resources that can be done more automatically.
And I think
that's the last word for you, Peter.
Yes, that's the last word for me. I think that that's really important. Where I've seen customers that have been successful at this, they've started off relatively small with an automation and a private cloud environment, and they've grown big because we can't tackle the whole world at once. Let's start off with some pending projects that I've got over the next 6 to 12 months. See if I can automate and bring them into the cloud, and then I can expand it from there.
Yep.
And that for me is where I've seen clients deliver a lot of value.
And the Reg audience have told us exactly the same.
Well, good. Everyone agrees.
Excellent.
Well, we'll see if you agree. Let us know what you thought of the Regcast afterwards, which you can do again from one of the little buttons at the top. We hope you've enjoyed it. That's all we've got time for. But there are more Regcasts coming up, more from HP when they're talking about private cloud, different aspects of that. And there will always be more from us. If you tell us what you want, we'll do our best to provide it for you. But from Peter and Tony and from me, Tim Phillips, for now, goodbye.